everybody, this is the Wikstrand. So, in the late 60s, a book was released called Airport. And Airport was a huge hit. You could see people reading this book everywhere, on the bus, at home, apparently also at airports. And whenever something is very popular, Hollywood will smell money. So they released Airport in 1970 with a huge cast of characters, with some pretty big names and a very big budget. It had about, I think, $80 million in today's money as the budget, and it was a huge hit. And Airport might be responsible for the crave for big, spectacular, soap opera filled nonsense disaster movies that became, a big trend in the 1970s, even though I think this movie technically not is a disaster movie, because, well, we'll get to that, but the disaster bit of the, story within the movie that we're going to take a look at today isn't, the focal point of the movie. It is actually, the soap opera storylines, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. It will also spawn 3 sequels, one decent, one pretty mediocre, and one absolute dumpster fire. But how good is the granddaddy of them all when it comes to disaster movies? Let's take a look at the show. This is Airport, in some cases also known as Airport 1970. Airport is hit with a monstrous blizzard, meaning that most people working on the airport is gonna have to, work overtime to, be able to get everybody home and stuff like that. And this really upset Mel Bakersfield's wife. Mel Bakersfield, played by Burt Lancaster, who is sort of the general manager of the airport, who's, arguing with his wife over this one. Another person who may or may not will have problems, in the, marriage or relationship category is Dean Martin, who has been banging one of his colleagues and now finds out that she's pregnant with his child. What is he going to do about it? George Kennedy is trying to, dig out airplanes and, help out as much as he can. And we also have this very friendly old lady who often, is a stowaway on airplanes for some reason. I don't know how they did that. But I guess that, boarding an airplane in 1970 was about like boarding a, bus in the 1970s, because, it is not, the airtight monstrosities that we have to go through today to, to be able to fly anywhere. And a couple of other storylines, well, competes for our attention. But the one that we really should be, holding out for is the one with the demolition expert. He's down on his luck and may have, some mental illness and stuff like that, because he's planning to take on board a bomb on the airplane. And he's going to detonate this over the Atlantic, and he's going to, make sure that his wife is getting insurance money and stuff like that. Will this work? We shall see. The thing is that all of these competing storylines kind of, pushes the interesting bit, the thing with the bomber, towards the side. And the consequence of that is the fact that we are going to have to wait a long time before any form of, peril or danger or disaster-like situations will, happen in this movie, because we're first going to have to, go through all of these things that we don't really care that much about. I would guess that, and when you would read every chapter, which I, guess just was from, one point of view, and then you would slowly see how everything come together and how that all of these things is interconnected with each other. I think that works in a book. But in a movie, it doesn't work as well, because you can always put away the book and then continue with it, in a week or two or a day or two or something like that. In this case, you're just having the entire story just going on all the time. And because we have to wait so long for anything to happen, it gets a little bit boring. Airport 1975 did have the advantage of having, the small Cessna crashing into that plane, so the stewardess have to, fly the plane and landing it. That happened in, the first act of the movie. We have to wait, I don't know, 1.5 hours, even more maybe, before anything remotely interesting happens. But this movie have the illusion that stuff is happening, because we have a lot of characters that are doing things. Now, all of these things they are doing, they don't really matter that much, but because they're doing things, it gives you the illusion that, you know, stuff is happening and that you're watching something that is interesting while you're really watching, you know, something that is kind of boring. The movie is also 2 hours and 17 minutes long, which is way too long for a movie like this. But there are upsides to this movie also. This movie is big and it is spectacular and it looks amazing, and it is a pretty interesting view into what air travel looked like in the early 1970s. And we have a bunch of pretty good actors. George Kennedy is great, Dean Martin is great, Burt Lancaster is great, Jane Seberg is pretty damn good also, and they are working hard, and the stuff that are written for them is also pretty good. But when the movie ends in, you know, lackluster fashion, you're just sort of, why was I watching this? Of the airport movies, I would say that this is the second best. The best one is by far the movie 1975 Airport, but this is probably the movie I would rewatch the least, because 75 was such a delightful cliché fest. 77 was at least having, you know, some aspect to it that I thought was fascinating, and Airport 1980 is a beautiful disaster, one of the most ridiculously awful movies that has ever been made. If you've never seen that one, go and see that absolute dumpster fire, because that is, oh boy, something to behold. But this movie is just played too straight, and there is so much stuff happens that doesn't mean anything, and when it's all said and done, it was just a bit of a shoulder shrug, not a popcorn fart essentially, but it was very, very sort of, huh? Well, that happened. This is not a movie I recommend people to see, but it is big and it is spectacular, and it is a fascinating look back, as I said, to what airline travel was in the early 1970s. There's also another problem this movie has. I have seen the movie Airplane about, I don't know, 35 times, and there were moments in this movie when I was howling with laughter because I see what they have sort of took from this movie to put into their movie, but for, you know, funs and giggles, and that didn't help this movie at all. But good performances, pretty good writings, but ultimately a pretty dull and pretty boring and pretty forgettable movie when it's all said and done. I much prefer the much hokier, much bigger and much more ludicrous disasters movies that will follow in the footsteps of, you know, this movie. My favorite of them all is probably The Towering Inferno. Not an easy movie to rate. I do appreciate the big scope it has. I do appreciate what the big budget has created in, you know, the scope of this movie. I also appreciate the story of the demolition expert and the bomb plot and stuff like that, but it didn't really lead to anything, and as I said, the rest of these competing storylines just took some of the shine off of that thing and left me a little bit, I don't really care that much about it. But in the end, I have to give Airport 1970 35 points. It is a barely okay movie, but it has aspects to it that I really like, and also it's too well produced and doesn't have all of that bad special effects that movies that would follow in its footsteps would be, you know, saddled with. So it has that going on for itself also. So I'll see you next time from, well, so-and-so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.